Hello, our friends, Evolutionary Energy Arts family.
Hello there, everybody.
So, we're going to put a few things together here. And, again, I like to, maybe I draw things out sometimes a little long, maybe, but what it is instead of just giving you the headlines, I want to give you like a thought process to put things together, maybe a different perspective that you haven't seen before, to get a bigger picture on what we're really, really talking about. Because, we're always seeing headlines all the time. We see headlines of war, headlines of the migrants coming into the country. But how often do we put like all these things in perspective historically, right?
Very important to understand the why behind things, because if we don't understand the why, well, then we just sort of buy into whatever we're being told on the headlines.
Yes, absolutely. And, I've always been kind of this geeky nerd statistician numbers almanac reading kid.
He is, very much so. Awesome, too.
Well, thank you. And, even though now I'm, in my mid 50s, I'm still a kid at heart, and that's what we should always be.
Very much so. Yep.
So what are we looking at? We're looking at Ellis Island. Ellis Island. And, unfortunately, in today's world, there's many people that will say, Ellis Island, what's that? And they don't know the history. So many of the migrants from Europe came through Ellis Island. Where'd they come? They came into New York. And from there, they dispersed into different places. And this is just part of our history. I had shared with you that on a personal level that my grandfather came from Michoacan, Mexico, on my dad's side. On my dad's side, basically, we're Mexican and Native American. On my mom's side, Irish and, an area of the world that is always changing hands. Sometimes it was part of the Austrian-Hungarian Empire. Other times it's part of different countries over there as well. As borders don't stay put. They just don't stay put in history. They don't. So we see these photos of the migrants coming in. Let's check you out. Here, this is the version from maybe 140 years ago, coming into Ellis Island, getting your physical to make sure you can make it into the country. People came in, and they did come in droves. And in fact, we're going to take a look at some of those numbers in a little bit. So why are we looking over here at this depiction of siege warfare in the Middle Ages? Well, because a lot of times people, for their own safety, lived behind the walls in towns and cities. And in times of war, they would retreat behind the walls of fortifications to survive. And sometimes these sieges would turn into events where people were unable, the invader was unable to take by force. So what would they do? They would starve people out. They would do siege warfare and starve people out as she's letting the monkeys in before they break the door down. Sorry, guys. Thank you for, again, putting up with the noise of the monkey butts. So, many times they couldn't take them. They couldn't get over the walls by force. So they would do siege warfare and basically try to starve the population into submission. And this would take days, weeks, sometimes months, and sometimes even longer. When we think to the famous Battle of Troy, it gave us the saying of beware Greeks bearing gifts. And what this was basically, many of you know the story of love and lust and all over a woman. And this whole war and siege, which took place, only ended when they feigned that they were giving up and offered a gift of a horse. And then when the people of Troy took the horse in and were, like, wow, this is great. This is nice. They're not going to attack us anymore. They gave us this big horse. And in the middle of the night, when everybody was celebrating, as they always tended to do, celebrate a little tipsy, falling asleep, then soldiers come out of the horse and open up the gates. So that's our lesson there, right? Because there is a Trojan Horse operation of which I am absolutely, positively sure. And I think many of you can see this going on as well. So now what are we looking at? Well, we're looking at the Battle of Normandy. This was an enormous battle. Normandy is in France. It's on the other side of the channel from England. And this was the largest amphibious invasion in history. Actually, it was in 1944, and it was basically, the tide had already turned against the Axis nations, which Germany, Italy, and Japan. But this was the one that basically put the nail in the coffin, so to speak. Yes, the war would last another year and even a little bit longer out in the Pacific. But for all intent purposes, it was pretty much over as far as you knew who the victor was going to be. This was a massive, massive operation with, well, as far as storming the beaches, about 180,000 soldiers stormed the beaches. Over 1 million men in total were used. And Normandy itself is interesting, because it's an area which was settled by the Northmen, or the Vikings, in France. As you can see, the scope of this operation, this was massive, massive. When we think of all the different people, as you see 7 soldiers in Normandy, American paratroopers, British commandos, Canadian infantrymen, Royal Navy gunner, American fighter pilot, and then you had German Panzer Grenadier and German Wehrmacht infantrymen as well. So, you definitely had to know who was wearing what, whether they were friend or foe. So, as you see here, on June 6, 1944, more than 156,000 American, British, and Canadian troops stormed 50 miles of Normandy's fiercely defended beaches in northern France in an operation that proved to be the critical turning point of World War II. And, it's just mind-boggling to see this. And again, there's Winston Churchill, who said, don't let a good crisis, get away without benefiting from it. And there we see FDR as well. This took a long time. This took years of planning to get this amount of people. And here you see it by the numbers. 5,333 Allied ships and landing craft embarking, nearly 175,000 men. British and Canadians put 75,215 troops ashore, Americans 57,500, for a total of 132,715, of whom about 3,400 were killed or missing. And it was just brutal to see. So now why are we jumping to Texas as we see Governor Abbott? And he seems to be serious now as far as shipping migrants to the U.S. Capitol. And he was interviewed on this, and he said, well, you can't really force anybody to go anywhere per se, but you can offer them a bus ride where they could go to the Capitol, and they could go and speak to the lawmakers who are running the show, apparently.
Mm-hmm. And just at this level, that really bothers me, because these people are coming to, most of them are coming to get some help, receive some kind of help, some relief, some food, some shelter, a job, a way to get their children fed. And they're just shipping them around like cattle. They think so little of them.
Well, it's going on right now anyway,
Yeah.
and not even Abbott, because, on a federal level, they're flying people into all different places, like Albany, New York, in planes and offloading them. And you you have to ask why. Why are they doing this on such a massive, massive scale? Because, you'll have people, and again, it amazes me how little our Supreme Court justices know, how little our lawmakers know when they're asked things that are very, very basic. And some people, there was a couple things, what can you say, comments where people are saying you're picking on somebody. People should be, you would hope that if people truly did have power, that they had a lot of intelligence to back up, and wisdom to guide them in making the right decisions. When you listen to people and these people are not that intelligent. Mm-hmm. They don't even understand history. Like there was a lawmaker that said, and a lawmaker from Texas that said, Well, I saw that, Governor Abbott was shipping them to Washington. I didn't know if they meant the state or D.C., but either way, it's like it should be pretty dang obvious it ain't going to be Washington State, and you should be aware of everything that's going on around you if you're in such an important position. This is exactly what we won't have when we get out of this Kali Yuga, because the leaders will be elected to lead on shown wisdom, not simply who can put the other side down better, who could trash talk better, who has the hookups monetarily to get it done, because it takes money to get elected in the first place, and not who's willing to basically sell their soul to the devil to get themselves and their family in a better position. Because these people are not smart. They're not intelligent. And I see that on both sides, watching some of the people that many people are relying on to, have the wisdom to guide. And then in their personal lives, they're making quotes that tell you that they don't have a clue. They don't even have a clue about taking care of their own health in many ways because of their eating, the way they eat, and things like that. When they make comments about going to fast food and stuff, you would think that in this day and time you would have the wisdom to understand exactly what's toxic and what's not. And what we ingest and put into our body affects our thinking process as well. And so it's a very, very sad situation what's going on here on so many levels. If you watch closely what these people in positions of authority are saying, because they really, obvious, they have to be puppets. They have to be puppets because they're incapable of any, deep logical reasoning. Texas begins dispatching buses of migrants to U.S. Capitol. The feds are responding to this. Now, eventually, I still feel Texas will probably be one of the first states that does break free. And I do think that this is all part of the intended breakup of the U.S. into smaller pieces. Texas public defender urges Biden to investigate Operation Lone Star. And again, that's where they're looking to relocate. But when you look at the numbers, when you're looking at the numbers, right, 18,000 migrants a day at the southern border. Okay, now why were we showing you guys the numbers of the Battle of Normandy? Because the number of soldiers at the Battle of Normandy was overwhelming. It was incredible, the amount of military power that was put together. All together, when not just the people that were invading, again, that was somewhere between 130 something and 175,000 soldiers hitting the beach, but there was 1 million soldiers involved. 18,000 migrants a day in 1 year's time is 6,570,000 people. That's 6,570,000 people in 1 year's time. 1 year's time. What if 1 in every 6 of those people is somebody that has, been given a job to do, so to speak? That will equal what we saw in that entire Battle of Normandy. That's huge. That is absolutely huge. And in actuality, in just 10 days' time, you'd have as many people that stormed the beach, potentially here on U.S. soil, perhaps with a job to do when the right time comes. And we're watching the conflict in, over there in Central Europe in that breadbasket area, and we're wondering, is it going to expand to NATO? Is it going to expand to the fine dining ware country? Perhaps, when there's some sort of move by the fine dining ware country on that little island nation to its southeast, maybe there'll be something else that happens here. Or maybe if there is a NATO escalation over there in Europe, then maybe that's a signal for the ones that are already here to go. When you look at who they're talking about coming across the border, as you see, Cuban migrants outpace Central Americans arriving at U.S. border. And again, we have nothing. Cindy and I have absolutely nothing against anybody of any ethnicity. And really, we look forward to the time when there are no borders, when the borders are gone. And that's a thing of the past, because people should be able to move freely and unrestricted. It's the system that causes the need for people to abandon their own area that they grew up in and look elsewhere for opportunity, and in many cases just to stay alive. As we see, they're building entire cities for migrants in the Netherlands, for people coming from the Ukraine. Entire cities are being built. It's not the people's fault that they have to just, move to survive. That's not their fault. And again, every culture has unique offerings to contribute to the greater society. So I would hope there'd be a time when there's no need for any borders, because also keeping us divided is the way they keep us always at war. But when you look at these numbers of what's going on, the numbers show there's something bigger going on. And when you hear where they're talking about people coming from, that should raise eyebrows. As you see, record number of migrants came to the border. This was last year. Actually, it's just gone through the roof in the past couple of years. As you see, they're even calling it a JB surge. 3,500 are caught daily, and many more are never caught. And then they're being moved all over the place. And they're coming in from all over the world. As we were talking about, people coming in from RUSSIA into the Keys in boats. This should be alerting people. Now, this alerts me big time, because I've had, visions going back to 1984 of basically a Red Dawn scenario in the U.S. And when I see this is exactly what I saw. U.S. on track to encounter record 2 million migrants on the southern border, right? Just think about what's already in place. What's already in place may be far larger than D-Day, than the Battle of Normandy. 1 million in a month? What if 10% of those are here on a mission? Venezuelan migrants walked to the U.S. border, then slept in a park for days. And why does the Department of Homeland Security order Cuban, Venezuelan, Nicaraguan, and Colombian migrants released? You got to ask yourself, what is really going on here? Because to me, it's exceedingly obvious. And when I'm looking at this photo and I'm trying to find, okay, here's a little one, here's a little one. That looks like a woman in the background. Everybody else is a male of basically military age in this particular photo. You gotta ask yourself, what's really going on? Cuba, Venezuela, Nicaragua. Cuba, Venezuela, Nicaragua. Russia announces further cooperation with Cuba, Venezuela, and Nicaragua. Wait a minute. Russia announces further cooperation with Cuba, Venezuela, and Nicaragua. DHS orders Cubans, Venezuelans, and Nicaraguans migrants released. Russia announces further cooperation with Cuba, Venezuela, and Nicaragua. DHS orders Cuban, Venezuelan, Nicaraguan, Colombian migrants released. Again, what's really going on in this picture? As the dogs are throwing bones around in the background there. When you look at immigration to the United States by decade, the largest period right now that we see here through 2000 was 2000, but also the time period in the early 20th century, 1901 to 1910. You see basically 9 million coming in a decade. That would be 900,000 coming in a single year. You're talking 2 million crossing in 1 year now. it's a big flux. Yes, the U.S. is a country of immigrants. We're a huge migrant population, biggest one in the world. As you see, Germany's actually second, Saudi Arabia, UK next. And again, the numbers that we're seeing now are absolutely dwarfing what we've seen historically. And again, it's nothing against migrants because, the Native American population right now, according to the Census Bureau, is 6.79 million. So everybody else basically is a migrant when you get down to it. And we should keep that in mind because, we've been here, 2 generations, 3 generations. There were those that were here for hundreds of generations. And they got booted off of their land and they got shoved into little areas with some of the worst land going. So again, this is not about migrants. This is more about what we're talking about in the first place. Not the migrants coming in, especially those legally. This is more a type of siege warfare. And this is more about getting your soldiers behind the gates.
Mm-hmm. Right. And, as I'm sitting here listening to this, listening to Mike talk about this, all I can really think about is these entities have no limits to their use of just flesh. If it's a warm body, they're going to put it somewhere where it's going to benefit them. And, we look at the leadership and what kind of human being really, really does that? And to me, it's obvious that it's not another human. It's something definitely overshadowed by entities that need control, want control, love control. So all of these things that we look at and we watch every day with just a flash of the headlines and without putting everything together, which is really, really important. We might think, wow, we just live in a really frustrating time. But no, it's much more than just frustration. We need to watch out for ourselves because they're going to only use us to the extent that they need a warm body.
So Russia wants Alaska back, right? Now, doesn't that maybe ring a little differently to you? And in 2005, again, the Chinese general made a speech talking about what an invasion of the U.S. would look like. And, haven't we seen what he said? I think we have. This is pretty obvious. So at some point in time, and I do feel it'll be before 2025, without a doubt, it could happen any time. We'll see the war come to these shores here in the U.S. because they're already here. They're already here in massive, massive numbers. And when we talk about Russia wanting Alaska back and maybe a little bit of California, the Chinese general basically said, well, who's the first people that inhabited the U.S.? Well, they came over the Siberian Bridge, at Land Bridge, and they're basically Chinese. So he also said that Taiwan wouldn't be enough to feed China. They would need the U.S., Australia, Canada to feed the Chinese population. And we see the entire destruction economically of the West. And we know there's a great reset coming. But the reset, just look to some of the other quotes that are out there. There was a Russian official just the other day saying, hey, the Great Reset's about us. We're the ones that are going to be on the other side of the Great Reset. Russia, China, and the other nations. Then you look to the Hopi prophecies. And again, they say that World War III it's going to lead to an attack on the U.S. by the ancient nations. And they mention China, and they also actually kind of allude to India as well as others being allied on the attack on the U.S. So again, this is basically not about migrants. No. This is a form of siege warfare that's going on. It's getting your people in position behind the gates.
Right, there's an agenda, and we can see this agenda playing itself out over and over and over and over. And I feel what we're trying to do is just prepare people for some chaos, because I don't see anywhere, unless you're on their side of the fence, that you can escape the chaos, because they're using us for their agenda. And that means that there's no one that's immune. But what can we do? We like to talk about what we can do. What we can do is find a practice that will help us sustain through these times, so that we can position ourselves at some point in our lives where we have our own freedom and our own sovereignty back. So that's kind of where I like to keep it, and understanding that, yeah, it's going to get chaotic, because sometimes if we know the story, we can see the story, we can adjust to it a lot better. If we know all of the things to the story, we can just adjust to them, and it's not so traumatic, because they also thrive on trauma, people being traumatized.
And when we go back to this Russian professor who said that the U.S. is going to break up, and he said this was going to break up right after the USSR broke up. He basically said, don't worry, USSR broke up, but the U.S. will break up too. And he talked about the California Republic side, California, Nevada, Oregon, Washington, and the West being under Chinese control or Chinese influence. And he, each segment, just think about how many people perhaps in Latin America remember, maybe a lot of Mexicans remember Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, California. At one point in time, that was part of Mexico as well. Again, the borders are always changing. So, you could quote any time period almost to justify your cause. The reality is, borders divide people. But unfortunately, in this world with the system that's in place, this is all about nonstop conflict. And this is all about the next step. And this is exactly what they are doing. And to me, it's just so clear and evident. Thank you guys, as always, for all your support. Check out Medicinal Foods. Use coupon code EEA. Get a discount. We need to be detoxing all the time. Also, thanks for your support on Ko-Fi and Patreon. And
we want to say a huge thank you to Will and Anthony for your support. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, Will and Anthony are our newest Patreons. And make sure you are subscribed to both channels, EEARTS and Evolutionary. Let's get Evolutionary back over 66,000 as they've tried to walk that back. I was going to bring back a topic that Cindy talked me out of right now. She's like, no.
Not right now.
No. They'll take it down.
Yeah, I just want a week for a breather. Then we'll tackle it.
Okay.
Yeah.
And let's get EEARTS over 16,000 subscribers in the face of this never-ending tide of, tying our mouths shut. Mm-hmm. Much love. Be prepared. God bless and namaste.
Namaste.